In some of your urban landscapes, those towers that look so permanent and solid and so on are probably pretty flimsy things ultimately. So that in itself may be a shocking picture in 50 years' time, or 100. But some of the things in your photographs are very transient. I'm thinking of like the ship breaking pictures. I mean, you couldn't go back and do that picture again. The rail cut, you could conceivably go back and find something there. The China pictures, some of those are really ephemeral. You were actually witnessing the disappearance of massive structures and so on. So we come to this word, document, that is art photographers are kind of wary of because they don't want to be thrown into that idea that it's simply reportage. But you do have that function too. You are a witness to your time. Are you comfortable with that? That art reportage thing?
Yeah, I think, I feel, and I've always felt that, there are the two big things that most artists are struggling with is form and content. And whether you're a painter or a photographer, those are the battles. And I always felt if it goes too much to the side of content, it does become more reportage, of the world, of telling a story. And if it goes too formal, then it becomes minimalist, it becomes reductive, it becomes more media-based. And I've wanted to kind of keep somewhere where both are, powerful elements within the image, but neither is primary.
There's a great example of that in the picture we've used to open the book here.
Yeah.
Where you think this seems to be a completely abstract picture. I thought it was like Renaissance tapestries when I first opened it up. And then you're pulled into it because of, I think, the beauty of the picture. And then you see these man-made, these buildings, which are huge in themselves, but they're reduced, they're the size of pinpricks almost. So that's a good example, I think, of what you're talking about, where you've got, for the person who looks, you've got real information, real reportage in that sense, documentary strength, and then you've got a very powerful picture. And that's why you look at it.
Right.
If you didn't have the powerful picture, you might just, as in the newspapers, you might look at a picture that's documenting the Red River pollution in Siberia right now. Okay, you look at this and go, ugh, and turn the page. But with your photograph, because you also have a Red River in Canada, you say, oh, isn't that beautiful? And then you catch yourself saying, oops, don't want to dip my toe in there.
Right. Well, often when people say that, and I say, well, I don't, when I make the image, that there's an environmental layer to that, that's tailings. But it isn't, my environmentalist, not in the kind of proper definition of what an environmentalist is. I'm looking at our environment, I'm looking at our extract industry environment, I'm looking at our built environment, I'm looking at our kind of destroyed environment where we're making room for a dam. I'm looking at all these kinds of environments. They're all intentional landscapes. None of these, I'm not a disaster photographer. I'm not chasing hurricanes or earthquakes or stuff like that, and floods. I'm looking at intentional landscapes. These are things that we make, and these are the consequences in the landscape of having to take that level of material out of that landscape, and this is what remains. So, but unlike a journalist, for instance, oftentimes they're being asked by, a magazine or something to go out there and capture this story. Whereas I'll go out, and sometimes it takes me 3 to 4 years to figure out how to make that picture. And I'll go back to that same place with different light. And I'll try different lenses and different cameras. I'll keep working it until I find until it in a way transcends its banality of, an industrial picture and enters into a place where you can engage with it on a different level, on a kind of more aesthetic level, on a level of somehow, this is somehow an important place, or there's something going on here that and I'm a big kind of believer of the Jungian archetype, that we are, if I'm drawn to it, I'm betting that you are too.
It's interesting that you don't go the next step where you could say, like the young Mishka Henner, you abandon photography, you just go with Google because it's all there, Google Maps, Google Earth. You just take it. So you could be looking straight down and find some of these patterns. If we look at the dryland farming, for example, I remember you telling me how you first found these designs. You found them on Google.
Somebody saw it in a book and took an iPhone picture, sent it to me, and I went, this is interesting. And then I went to the location on Google Earth and saw how vast the area was. And then I says, now I'm going to rent a helicopter, which there was no helicopter near there. So we had to get a helicopter with a truck and fuel so that we could refuel in like some abandoned airport, and because there was no gas, and be able to get the chopper to this area to be able to fly around and
I remember you also saying, correct me if I'm wrong, that when you first went on Google, you sort of estimated what height you'd have to be to get the picture you wanted, and that 10,000 feet, I think it was.
I tended to have a kind of a rule of thumb when I was doing a lot of my aerial work, and the rule of thumb often was, I don't want to get so far away that a building or a truck or things that we can identify become so small that they're not relevant.
Right.
So that was always around 700 feet to 1,000 feet. So when I went there, the whole first day with a chopper, I finally get the chopper out there. I fly for a couple hours, because that's all you get is about 2 hours in a chopper before you have to refuel. I'm shooting at about 700 feet, and then I look at the images that night. And because I'm going by my standard, this is my standard height, and something's bothering me. Something's like not right. The images aren't that interesting, and I'm thinking, what's wrong? And then I look at it, and then I go to Google Earth, because we did some research in Google Earth, and I start looking at the different distance. So I start pulling back and doing an oblique, and I'm thinking, well, I have to get higher. I have to get to maybe 1,500 or 2,000. So then I went back with this pilot, flew the same area at 1,500 to 1,800 feet, and then all of a sudden 1,800 felt right. And then I started shooting the whole project at that height, and all of a sudden it all came together.
You're in each project. You didn't think, I've got 20 to do. When you were doing number 2, you didn't think, I've got 18 more. Right? But now, you're of a certain age, and you have a certain accomplishment. You can look back and say, I have done those 20 projects. Do I have another 20 in me? Or how does that experience of having to look at everything in essential elements, how has that influenced how you're going to progress now?
It does become a challenge as to where else, one can go, and without kind of repeating yourself. So there is this kind of, it's a question mark that I have. Like, is there an end point, or is there something where I just start going back and doing the same thing differently, which I am doing a bit. I do that a bit from time to time. Like, for instance, because we're doing a film, and the film is taking me to some of my earlier subjects, like quarries. So now I'm going back to quarries filmically, but I'm also going back to quarries, which I thought I had ended that chapter in my life. But I am going back to quarries because in the filmic sense of things, I'm going to be going back to Carrera, for instance, but I'm going with drones. So I'll be able to all of a sudden release, the view from the edge of the quarry or from the ground. So I'm releasing myself from the ground for the film, but I can put my Hasselblad up there, and all of a sudden I have this Hasselblad that I can shoot from any perspective on these same things. So all of a sudden it's kind of like, well, this is a whole new way of looking at this thing. So yeah, maybe I finished looking at quarries from the ground, but maybe I'm not finished looking at it from that slightly elevated position, and that I can get from a drone. So technology is allowing me to kind of go back and maybe address things that I've done in the past in a kind of interesting way, that, because quite frankly, had I had the chance to have that perspective back in the 90s when I was doing that, I would have gladly taken it.
I'm sure.
But I couldn't. The technology wasn't there.
So in 2036, we could do a second Essential Elements with all the same projects, but from the drone.
From a drone. And there is something, going back to the Google Earth, why, all of that image material is in Google Earth, and, could one do it? Here's the thing. The resolution of Google Earth is just nowhere near what I'm doing with the kind of, lenses and chips and things that I'm using, the technology. So the reason you have that experience in front of these prints is that I've optimized, I've gone through several lenses to find the lens, the aerial lens that's going to give me that crispness from corner to center. The chips, I happen to fall onto the Hasselblad because I like the color space. There's a camera called Phase, which is equally as good in terms of image quality and sharpness, maybe even better, but the color isn't the space that I like. I like this color space because it goes back to my roots of color negative. It feels like a negative versus transparency. I don't like the transparency look. It's kind of brash and harsh and saturated, whereas this is softer and more kind of easy to see, and the tones are more kind of lush and realistic to me. So there's a lot of things that you're not going to get that and a satellite's capturing, a good one is a meter square becomes a pixel. Well, if you look at that, you've got trucks there, there's probably 500 pixels making up that truck that's only a quarter inch, so you can actually see the tire on the truck. So there isn't an equivalent experience to be had from Google Earth. So so that that's something that in the present, you have to be in the presence of the subject with the tool sets that I'm working with to be able to get that kind of quality to make these kind of prints. So that there's no way I could do Google Earth and get that series downstairs where you can actually see the pattern of the mud, in the background. So it's not possible. And books are certainly part of the process of, taking a lot of different projects, ideas, bringing them into a contextual relationship. There's a lot of depth to it, there's writing around it, and you kind of take a deeper look at, what the work is about, and it's all contained. So if you see a show like this and you come in, you see the show or the show downstairs, and it's ephemeral. It's here, it's now, it goes down, some get sold, they get dispersed. It never really reappears again in the world this way. So these are just momentary, whereas the book isn't ephemeral.
Right.
The book stays, and that sequence stays, and those images remain, and what's said about them remains. And so these go into deep future as well. And I find that's an interesting thing about a book, is that, it can continue to deliver 200 years from now, 500 years from now, it's all still there.
Well, we should add too that we added the voices of some of the finest critics who've written about your work. So I think we ended up with 30 different
voices, yeah.
passages of text from particularly acute observations. And I'm hoping that also will add to the longevity of things.
And I also I'll say one thing, like there was a lot of debate, we talked a lot about the cover, the essential elements, the name of the book. And it's interesting because I finally liked it when we landed on it and stayed with it, because it's something that I think I said very early in my career. I'm walking through forest looking for the essential element to slice it out. Because of this complex chaos, I'm going to try and create order to find that essential element within that chaos. And I remember when I first used it, but there's a double entendre as well, in that when I started doing mining, these are, from the elemental table, these are essential elements that we need: copper, iron, silver. Water. So in a way, there's that, the whole process in which I visually came to train my eye to define these different subjects and be able to find the frame within these different subjects by going through kind of a lot of chaos and a lot of random stuff that doesn't work together to find the moment that it does all work together. And at the same time, a lot of the subject matter are also the essential elements. So I love that kind of double play within the title.
And the cover, you know, could be anything in a sense. You know, I mean, you know it's real. It's a real landscape. It has a kind of calligraphic sense here, but this part it could be the surface of the moon.
Yeah.
In a sense, we're creating those kinds of surfaces on the planet.
It's kind of like Chinese character.
Yeah, Chinese character. That's right. So Ed, thank you very much. It's been really. I'm always learning something when we sit and talk this way, and. Congratulations on the book and congratulations on the show.
And I want to thank you for all your hard work on, putting it together and being so sensitive. And I think you win on the curator in my studio the longest, looking at my work. So congratulations.
Great. Thanks, Ed.